Blade Runner is based on the 1968 Philip K. Dick novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is quite possibly the dumbest title I've ever heard in my entire life.
Stop right where you are!
Tells the story of Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, a former police detective working in Los Angeles in the year 2019. Despite not working there anymore, we gotta help create the cliche of him being asked by his former employers somehow. He gets asked by the LAPD to take out a fugitive group of robots known as replicants, led by Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, who wants to be treated as actual people rather than slaves. Entitled b****s.
Indulge me.
But Deckard gives no shits and kills them all anyway, before hooking up with one of them called Rachel, played by Sean Young. We'll get to that.
But I understand what you mean.
Interest in adapting Philip K. Dick's stupidly titled novel actually dates as far back as 1968, with Martin Scorsese even being attached to direct. But due to Dick's strong dislike of the Hollywood system, this quickly fell through. However, the rights were eventually bought by producer Herb Jaffe in the early 1970s, and a script was finally written by his son Robert. However, when Dick was presented with the screenplay, he thought it was a complete disgrace. Jaffe's script was so terribly done. Robert flew down to Santa Ana to speak with me about the project, and the first thing I said to him when he got off the plane was, "Shall I beat you up here at the airport, or shall I beat you up back at my apartment?"
This is a bad one.
Eventually, another draft of the script was written in 1977 by Hampton Fancher, and it was bought by producer Michael Dealey, who then approached Ridley Scott to direct. Scott had turned the movie down before as he was busy working on an adaptation of Dune, but he eventually accepted the job after it became clear that the Dune movie was never going to get off the ground, and he wanted a faster-paced project to take his mind off the recent death of his older brother. Scott's involvement actually proved to being a big help, as his hiring led to the studio Filmways Incorporated increasing the film's budget from $13 million to $15 million.
Smart.
However, Scott's involvement also led to conflicts with screenwriter Hampton Fancher. Fancher's script focused more on environmental issues and less on the novel's themes of humanity and religion, and Scott wanted these elements to be changed as well as the movie's title. This disagreement led to Fancher walking out of the production entirely, and the script was then heavily rewritten by David Webb Peoples, though Fancher did eventually return to contribute to additional rewrites. The title dispute was eventually resolved when Fancher found a cinema treatment by William S. Burroughs for Alan E. Nourse's novel The Blade Runner. Scott liked the name, so the producers obtained the rights to the titles, finally resulting in the name we all know and love.
I guess.
When it came to casting Deckard, Robert Mitchum was the original choice for the role, but he showed very little interest in the story, so the idea was quickly dropped. Dustin Hoffman was the second choice, and he even met with Scott over several months to discuss the role, but he eventually dropped out due to creative differences. And Gene Hackman, Sean Connery, Jack Nicholson, Paul Newman, Clint Eastwood, Tommy Lee Jones, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Al Pacino, and Burt Reynolds were all considered, but Scott eventually picked Harrison Ford after seeing his performances in Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark. However, even more problems arose when Filmways suddenly withdrew the budget just before shooting was about to start, even though they had spent over $2.5 million just on pre-production. However, in only 10 days, Dealey managed to secure an additional $21 million through producer Alan Ladd Jr., who worked at Warner Brothers, and filming finally began on March the 9th, 1981. But believe it or not, the problems didn't stop there.
No, really.
Because this was Ridley Scott's first film produced in America, he was shocked to discover that American crews operated very differently from British ones. When working in the UK, Scott was primarily a camera operator and would always step behind the camera to see through the viewfinder. This wasn't common practice in America and led to a lot of tension between Scott and the crew. Crew members responded to Scott's behaviour by wearing t-shirts during filming that read, "Yes, governor, my ass." Scott responded with a t-shirt of his own, "Xenophobia sucks." This incident was later nicknamed the T-Shirt War.
Okay. Bad joke.
Scott also frustrated the cast and crew by continuously making changes to the sets and story, to the point that the writers found that any rewrites they did were rendered completely useless by the time they handed them in. In addition, Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott hated working together and constantly argued over how to handle each scene in the film. Ford later called the movie the most frustrating experience of his career, and Scott called Ford the biggest pain in the ass he has ever worked with. Despite this feud, the two seem to have made up in recent years, and Ford even stated that he would be more than happy to work with Ridley again. Who's the biggest pain in the ass I've ever worked with? It's gotta be Harrison. He'll forgive me because now I get on with him. Now he's become charming, but he knows a lot, that's the problem. When we worked together, it was my first film up in America, and I was the new kid on the block, but we made a good movie. I admire his work. We had a bad patch there, and I'm over it.
I'm sorry.
However, Ford wasn't the only actor who didn't enjoy being on set. The rest of the cast was so unhappy making the movie that they even went on strike towards the end of principal photography, resulting in the shooting schedule being delayed even further, and filming became rushed in order to complete the movie on time, resulting in several accidents. Most prominently, 2 of Rutger Hauer's stunt doubles had been injured while making Roy Batty's jump during the climax, so Hauer asked for the gap to be tightened a bit and then successfully performed the jump. When filming his death scene, after 25 hours of shooting, Hauer was so exhausted that he excused himself, went back to his hotel room and collapsed. When he returned to set the next day after a decent sleep, the strike had been averted. Hauer was able to finish his scenes properly and even came up with his famous death monologue on the spot. Hauer later called it his favourite of all the movies he starred in. Despite the movie's stressful production, Blade Runner finally finished filming in July of 1981, and the problem seemed to have stopped there. No, only kidding. Here's some more.
You're a dedicated man.
When screening a rough cut of the film to a test audience, it was such a flop that the studio ordered huge changes to the movie, including adding a voiceover narration, a happier ending, and the removal of a Holden hospital scene in the hope that this would make it more marketable. However, Scott, Ford, and the producers were all heavily against this idea, resulting in Scott being fired from the production completely, and Ford was forced to narrate the voiceovers regardless. When we started shooting, it had been tactily agreed that the version of the film that we had agreed upon was the version without voiceover narration. It was a nightmare. I thought that the film had worked without the narration, but now I was stuck recreating that narration, and I was obliged to do the voiceovers for people that did not represent the director's interests. I went kicking and screaming to the studio to record it.
I don't know such stuff.
So after a myriad of delays, reshoots, rewrites, fired directors and unhappy actors, Blade Runner was finally released on June the 25th, 1982 and was a complete flop. On a budget of $30 million, the film only grossed $41.5 million. And the reason it failed so badly was because the studio decided to release the film the same weekend as E.T.
He's a genius.
To add on to the kick in the balls that the filmmakers were getting, most reviews ranged from mixed to negative. Scott seems more concerned with creating his film worlds than populating them with plausible characters, and that's the trouble this time. Blade Runner is a stunningly interesting visual achievement, but a failure as a story.
Ah, I knew it.
Sheila Benson from the Los Angeles Times called it Blade Crawler, criticizing the slow pacing. Pat Berman from Columbia Record described it as science fiction pornography, but Pauline Kael stated that though the film features underdeveloped characters, it deserves a worthy place in film history for its distinctive vision. Blade Runner went on to be nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Production Design and Best Visual Effects, but won neither, was nominated for 4 Saturn Awards but won none, though it did pick up 3 BAFTAs for Best Production Design, Best Costume Design and Best Visual Effects. For years it seemed like Blade Runner was a flop and that it would live on in infamy as one of the most disastrous productions in the history of cinema.
But wait! There's more!
Despite the initial negative reception, Ridley Scott was eventually given free rein to produce a director's cut of the film due to his dislike for the theatrical version, resulting in said cut being released in 1992, which cut out the voiceover narration entirely as well as the happy ending, but he was still restricted by the producers on certain scenes. It was the release of this cut that the film started to undergo a critical re-evaluation. However, Scott then decided to go full George Lucas and released another version of the film known as the Final Cut, even bringing Harrison Ford to help oversee the process. And this was the only version of the film where Scott had complete artistic and editorial control. The final cut of Blade Runner was finally released in 2007, and many call this the definitive version of the film, and that's the copy we'll be looking at today. Despite initial negative reception, Blade Runner has since been re-evaluated and now considered one of, if not the most revolutionary sci-fi films of all time. The film was also incredibly well received among fellow filmmakers. George Lucas called it a landmark in science fiction filmmaking. James Cameron called it a technical marvel and a huge influence on his own work. It's Christopher Nolan's favourite film of all time, and the creators of movies such as Ghost in the Shell, The Matrix, The Fifth Element, Akira, Strange Days, Dark City, Gattaca, Dredd, and many others have cited it as inspiration, proving that the film's impact can still be felt to this day. But it is execution. I mean, they didn't voluntarily leave. It's murder. It's killing them, and let's be honest. Well, let's just see how outdated this is. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. Okay, never mind. So the only way to really differentiate a human from a replicant is to question them. Replicants show very little emotion, so they're asked a series of questions in hopes to strike some emotional response. Or not, thus exposing them as a replicant. But this dude's responses are hilarious.
You're in a desert, walking along in the sand when all of a sudden...
Is this the test now?
Yes, you're in a desert, walking along in the sand when all of a sudden you look
What
down...
one?
What?
What desert?
Doesn't make any difference what desert is completely hypothetical.
But how come I'd be there?
Maybe you're fed up. Maybe you want to be by yourself. Who knows? You look down and you see a tortoise, Leon. It's crawling towards
Tortoise? What's that?
Wow, security sucked in 2019. By the way, is it just me, or does this dude at the front look like an old Harrison Ford? I actually thought I accidentally put in the sequel for a second.
Give me 4.
Das ist Judenvision.
No, 4. 2, 4.
Das ist Judenvision.
And noodles.
Admiral Engem bitte. He's saying you under arrest.
Wait, so he could barely speak English 1 second, and now all of a sudden he's completely fluent. I will say, the scenery for the futuristic Los Angeles looks amazing, and this predates Back to the Future Part 2. It really does have a magical and whimsical feeling to it. It looks gorgeous.
Well, I don't get it. What do they risk coming back to Earth for? That's unusual. Why? What do they want out of the Tyrell Corporation?
Well, you tell me, pal. That's what you're here for.
What's with the Harrison, are you okay? Are you having a stroke?
Have you ever retired a human by mistake?
Just say killed! It means killed! So he meets Rachel and tries to show off his abilities to identify replicants by questioning her.
You've got a little boy. He shows you his butterfly collection, plus the killing jar.
I take him to the doctor.
Wow, you're already better than Jeffrey Dahmer's parents. Also, she makes it wicked obvious here that she's a replicant. She sounds so emotionless during every response. At least try to hide it. The thing that annoys me is that they say these are questions, but they're not. There's literally no questions here. They're scenarios. He's not asking them anything.
You're watching television. Suddenly you realize there's a wasp crawling on your arm. You're reading a magazine. You come across a full-page nude photo of a girl. You're watching a stage play. A banquet is in progress.
Alright, mate, I'm just going to the shop. Be back in a bit. Okay! You're not going to answer my question? No. What? I'm going to the shop. I'll be back in a bit. But you didn't ask any- Answer the question! What are you saying? I swear to God, you answer my question! I'm sorry! But he manages to correctly identify Rachel as a replicant.
She's a replicant, isn't she?
I'm impressed. How many questions does it usually take to spot one?
They're not questions!
I don't get it, Tyrell. How many questions?
They are not questions!
Yes. Questions.
Wow, this movie doesn't know what the questions are! George Lucas, show yourself! Wait, they have flying cars, but they still need cheap-ass looking lifts. The film really does have a unique cinematic look to it. Even when they're not outside, it still looks really futuristic. It really doesn't look like a 1982 movie. It looks such high quality. This was years ahead of its time. Wait, they have flying cars, but they still use Polaroid photographs.
You want to come in?
I was hoping you'd say that.
Hear that? That's my Sinister music. Yeah, I'ma stab you in the ass, It's weird how she's one of the replicants and looks all evil, but meets up with a nice dude who lives in the creepiest house in the entire world with a bunch of creepy-ass soldier toys. Is this Sid from Toy Story all grown up?
Look, my friend. Dr. Lewis is down in first sector, Chinatown.
I love how in movies they're just like, oh yeah, you could find him in Chinatown. Apparently they just never go anywhere else. But weirdly, Deckard puts on a fake voice to get information out of this woman.
Excuse me, Miss Salome, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm from the American Federation of Variety Artists.
But why? She doesn't recognize him, and at one point he goes back to his normal voice and she doesn't even notice.
Were you asked to do anything that's lewd or unsavory or otherwise repulsive to your person?
Before he does his nerdy voice again. Literally, there's no reason for this! So she attacks Deckard as he gives chase, but... Move! Get out of the way! Wait, was he really going to shoot her through this big-ass crowd of people? And these replicants really die from just a few bullets? Matt, these ain't Terminators, these are pussies. It is treated like such a big deal when she dies too. It gets a slow-mo and everything. It is quite soothing. Yet creepy. But this scene. My God. This scene. Deckard rapes Rachel. That's not a joke! Deckard, the main character, rapes Rachel. He kisses her, she's not into it, she tries to run away, he violently slams the door shut, shoves her, and then she feels pressured and gives in. This is rape! Deckard is a rapist! What the hell? Surprisingly, I have a defense for this scene. Kind of. It's been highly speculated over the years whether or not Deckard himself is actually a replicant. Harrison Ford stated that he isn't, and even the film's own screenwriters deny him being a replicant. However, director Ridley Scott claims that he is, and it's something he and Harrison Ford have disagreed with over the years. But the thing is, him being a replicant explains so much more than if he wasn't. For the majority of the film, Deckard seems to only have one facial expression. He barely ever emotes. I originally criticised this when watching the film, but looking back, this makes perfect sense if he is in fact a replicant. Now I know what you are thinking. How can he be a replicant when he does show emotion at several parts of the movie? When Rachel first shows up, Deckard clearly looks uncomfortable and then angry. He shows emotion when Leon the replicant attacks him. He clearly shows fear and pain when he's attacked by Roy. And he also shows emotion at the climax when he gets his ass handed to him. And hell, if you want to go that route, Rachel smiles, as does Roy constantly. This chick clearly shows anger as she attacks him. Roy clearly shows emotion as he pops someone's head off. But the movie clearly states that replicants are capable of learning emotion over time.
They were designed to copy human beings in every way except their emotions. And the designers reckoned that after a few years, they might develop their own emotional responses. Oh, hate, love, fear, anger, envy.
It's right there! This would explain why he's so monotonous throughout the whole movie. He emotes sometimes, but it's very minimal. He's mostly socially awkward and anxious. They even tease it at one point.
Did you ever take that test yourself? Deckard?
He avoids the question. Why was that put in there if he isn't, in fact, a replicant? In fact, there's even a scene where he talks to Rachel and very briefly his eyes glow, like other replicants. He also has an origami vision at one point, which later comes true, suggesting he has implanted memories like other replicants. It's all there. And it would also explain the rape scene. I think this scene actually works really well because if you watch it with two different mindsets, the whole scene changes. Watch this, believing Deckard is human. The look on his face is disturbing and threatening. It's completely f***ed up. Now watch it again, believing that he's a replicant. The look on his face is neutral, and these machines don't understand the boundaries in relationships, so therefore he doesn't see this as being wrong, nor does she. It's just a normal thing. To me, this scene is only excusable if Deckard is in fact a replicant. If he isn't, he's a douchebag who raped a robot! And I know he's not really a hero, he's been chasing and killing essentially slaves for the whole film, but there's no repercussions for this. There's never a moment where he stops to think, what did I do? It's never even acknowledged again. The movie just carries on like nothing happen. If he's a human, this is a terrible scene. But to me, I think it only works if he's a replicant. So, I'm sorry guys, Deckard's a replicant. I'm just saying.
I don't think there's another human being in the whole world who would have helped us.
Because you're all loonies! But somehow, the replicants playing chess, they actually managed to make it really intense. Look at it!
Bishop to King 7. Check.
Bishop to King 7, checkmate, I think.
It's so dramatic! It does drag on a bit, though.
What seems to be the problem?
The lead character is a rapist, and I'm not really a big fan of the replicant's exposition. It just drags a bit, and I don't particularly find it that interesting. I mean, I'm glad they gave them more of a backstory, but yeah, it goes on a bit too long for my liking. Just go back to Han Solo shooting things.
I've done questionable things.
But at least you didn't rape. Okay, Halloween 3, this is how you have a crushed head death. It looks awesome, this is insane!
This sector's closed to ground traffic. What are you doing here?
I'm working. What are you doing?
No! Stop acting normal! You just raped a woman, you psychopath! But it is really creepy as he checks out the house of weird-ass toys and mannequins and What the even is this? Looks like David Bowie's Then he shoots her. Good boy.
Not very sporting to fire on an unarmed opponent.
Well, you are in America. I get a Silence of the Lambs feel to this climax. I get the impression that that movie was inspired by this. It's so creepy as he investigates the house. And when Roy finds his girl dead, man, I feel more sorry for him than Deckard. Deckard's a rapist. F him. No, wait, don't f him. That's exactly how I say it right before I'm about to nut.
You better get it up. I'm gonna have to kill you.
Okay, I am sorry, but that's hilarious. Look at it. I ain't taking this seriously.
That's all, folks.
But this dude is an amazing bad guy. Well, he's not even a bad guy. That's what's great about this movie. There's no good guys or bad guys. What are the replicants actually guilty of? They're used as slaves and they just want equality. They've done nothing wrong. Deckard is just hired to eliminate them. He's doing his job. Okay, he rapes people, but still.
Long live the king.
But this moment is truly incredible.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave.
And he even saves Deckard, who now has to live knowing what he's endorsed. He's allowed the slavery to happen. It's a brilliant message.
Do you love me?
I love you.
Do you trust me?
I trust you.
Why? He raped you! Call the police! You're a hostage! The movie is amazing. It clearly made an impact and you can see its influence on future films. Total Recall is one that springs to mind, and although I prefer that one, this is still a well put together movie. It is a bit slow at points, but the action is great, the acting perfect, and it constantly keeps you guessing. It's a movie worth checking out, and it definitely hasn't aged a day. Ice Cream Van. Rumour has it in 2019 there'll be ice cream vans. For f***'s sake. Turn it off. You're parked.